because, of course, the group of leaders in the White House was far smaller than this very significant group, the Coalition of the Willing, largely European and Commonwealth leaders. We don't know, of course, what the various countries involved in that coalition have committed to as in terms of security guarantees in the event there being a Ukraine peace deal. I suppose that's partly because they don't want to provide any negotiating advantage to Russia, but also I'm sure in different countries there may be domestic political considerations too. Certainly the UK has described what happened yesterday in the White House as a breakthrough. Keir Starmer saying that commitment to US involvement in security guarantees is significant. And as you say, the chief of the UK Defence Staff, the top officer in the UK military, Sir Tony Radakin, is currently on his way to Washington, Geeta, to discuss exactly what the US will provide. Clearly the hope in Westminster, in London, is that there'll be more details in the coming days as to the US's role, and all of this bolsters Volodymyr Zelensky's position in negotiations with Russia, if they do happen in the coming weeks.
And Joe, it was absolutely fascinating, wasn't it, to watch all the interactions between those leaders, something that we don't necessarily get to see very often. And interesting to see Jonathan Powell, the British National Security Advisor, in the room too for some of those meetings. Now, he has a lot of previous experience, very crucially involved in the Northern Ireland peace process, then worked in conflict resolution privately for many years. Does that tell us anything about, for example, the British government and this Coalition of the Willing group in terms of how they might be thinking now about very detailed planning for any land exchange or for what a security guarantee could look like? Because there's a lot of detail that needs to be worked through.
There certainly is, and the view of Number 10 on land, on territory, is it really should be a matter for the Ukrainian people. Certainly UK government sources seem pretty pleased that Donald Trump didn't put pressure on Volodymyr Zelensky, at least in front of the cameras, to explain what land could possibly be ceded. UK government sources don't want to go anywhere near that, and they say that's a matter for Volodymyr Zelensky, and Ukraine may move slowly. On the point of Jonathan Powell, he was seen in the back of shot on a seat behind all those leaders. Interesting that two Tony Blair era figures in Jonathan Powell, the UK National Security Advisor, and Peter Mandelson, who is the UK's ambassador to the US, are heavily involved in this. I've spoken to people close to Keir Starmer in recent weeks who say part of the power of Jonathan Powell, even though he's never seen really in front of the camera and doesn't do interviews, is that because of his work in Northern Ireland and in that peace process, he does get a hearing in various European capitals, including in Kyiv. And this person said to me, if Jonathan Powell comes to you with a paper or a proposal, you're going to at least listen to it. So I think he is at the heart of these negotiations, and also, Geeta, I think at the heart of this new coalition of the willing.
Yeah, Joe Pike, for now, thank you very much indeed, and we'll keep across any updates with you as we get them. Well, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that he's already working on concrete security guarantees for Ukraine. The national security advisors from different countries are in constant contact, as we've been hearing. Well, in a social media post, President Zelensky described the talks in Washington as a truly significant step towards ending the war and securing long-term safety for Ukraine. Meanwhile, President Trump says he's spoken to Vladimir Putin about the next steps in his efforts to end the war in Ukraine and is hoping to arrange a meeting between the Russian and Ukrainian presidents. The Kremlin has also confirmed there was a 40-minute phone call between Trump and Putin, during which both leaders discussed the possibility of continuing direct talks between Russia and Ukraine. Well, we are going to bring you analysis from the US, Ukraine and Russia, but first this report from our North America correspondent, Orunade Mukherjee.
And navigating a complex path to peace in what was a day of extraordinary diplomacy at the White House. All smiles amidst an air of positivity. A marked change from President Zelensky's last visit 6 months ago, which ended in a heated exchange.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. If I can, first of all, thank you for invitation, and thank you very much for your efforts, personal efforts to stop killings and stop this war. Thank you.
Loads of thanks and some light humor over the Ukrainian leader's suit this time, given how he had chosen that over the usual fatigues after being criticized last time.
President Zelensky, you look fabulous in that suit.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, you look good.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, looks good on
I
you.
said to the one that attacked you last time. See, now he said, I remember that.
Yeah, I apologize to you. You look wonderful.
As the European leaders joined in, President Zelensky hailed the talks to be the best conversation yet with Donald Trump. Europe and the UK will be key to any NATO-style agreement that they would all rally to defend Ukraine in the future. Conversations largely centered on what security guarantees Ukraine would be given and the level of US's involvement.
There's going to be a lot of help. It's going to be good. They are first line of defense because they're there. They're Europe. But we're going to help them out also. We'll be involved.
But later on, in a post on Truth Social, Mr. Trump's offer for help was explained as, quote, coordination from the US, making the exact same nature of help from the US still unclear.
What shall we do when the war is over? Protection after the end of the war. It is very important that the United States of America is sending the signal that they will be among those countries who will help and who will coordinate, and that they'll be participating in the security guarantees for Ukraine, which is a huge step forward.
President Trump says he is now working to arrange a bilateral meeting between the two countries at war and then a possible trilateral meeting, after that with him present. Speaking to the BBC after the talks, UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer said he was pleased with the outcomes of yesterday's meetings.
So a real breakthrough on security guarantees. This is something that's been needed for a long time, very important for security back in the United Kingdom as well as across wider Europe. And then secondly, moving on with the bilateral meeting and then trilateral meeting between the presidents, and the second one including President Trump. That is in order to try to get to an outcome, a peace that is lasting and that is just.
As President Trump tries to project himself as the leader who is trying to get peace deals done around the world, that remained the crux of the conversations all through yesterday, with European leaders complimenting his efforts in trying to resolve the conflict. In the absence of a ceasefire, leaders know they are racing against the clock to get a peace deal done. Until that happens, the military onslaught on the ground is expected to continue. Arunodaya Mukherjee, BBC News, Washington.
Well, before European leaders sat down with President Trump in the East Room at the White House, a microphone picked up remarks between the US leader and the French President Emmanuel Macron. President Trump appeared to be reassuring his French counterpart that Vladimir Putin was open to making a deal.
I think he wants to make a deal for me. You understand that? As crazy as it sounds. Yeah, sit down. Sit down, everybody.
Okay.
I think we'll let the press come in for a minute.
Whether you could pick that up, it seemed to be Donald Trump saying that he wants to make a deal with me, referring, we presume, from President Putin. Well, let's speak to Dr. Olga Krasiniak, Associate Professor at the National Research University Higher School of Economics in Moscow. Thank you very much for being with us. I don't know whether you could hear that little exchange that we just ran that was picked up on the microphones from yesterday. Do you think that Donald Trump's instinct there that President Putin does actually now want to do a deal with him is true?
Well, I believe that Russia, together with the United States, they opt for peace. But it should be a conditional peace, of course. So with addressing all these initial problems or issues which led to this conflict. And on the other hand, we have European leaders and Zelensky, Ukrainian president, who continue to opt for the war because they want to continue to contain Russia. So, and we see this colliding narratives and colliding attitudes. But two great powers, the United States and Russia, I believe they have this decisive approach, and those countries and those leaders who will decide.
In terms of what the next steps are, do you think the Kremlin now is going to accept any kind of ceasefire, or will it want to move directly to some sort of final peace move? And is it going to accept security guarantees which are not delivered by NATO but on NATO style?
Well, Russia is open for peace talks, and it was explicitly announced from the beginning of the war in early 2022. And what Russia wants, what Russia's conditions, it's also known, and it wasn't changed. So Russia's foreign policy behavior and Russia's attitude in Ukraine are known, and they were not changed. So, but the next step, so I believe that would be the continuation of the discussions and like a real, just bringing real steps with the United States, because it would not be that Russia would agree or would accept something. It would be the United States would maybe push Ukraine or European countries to accept Russia's attitude and Russia's condition. So,
what do you mean exactly by that? Because we've heard discussion in the last few days of potentially some exchange or giving up of land potentially by Ukraine. Nothing agreed, of course, as yet. But that could only even be contemplated if there are really robust security guarantees, because Ukraine needs to know and Europe needs to know that this cannot happen again, that any further encroachment on Ukrainian territory cannot happen again.
You know, the only one guarantee can be given by Russia to Ukraine is having good relations between Russia and Ukraine. It would be the only way, the only thing that would keep Ukraine in safe position. Because, you know, here's the proverb, choose your neighbor. And probably that Ukrainian choice for different countries, like distant countries, maybe it's not a smart choice. You know, I cannot even imagine that, let's say, Scotland or North Ireland would ask for guarantee China or anyone else. So, and same can be applied to Ukraine. So having good relations with Russia, having our common historical and cultural heritage, so that will be the only way would keep Ukraine in safe place.
How can Ukraine trust Moscow, given what has happened in recent years? And what has Moscow got against the Europeans giving, and with the US providing those security guarantees? Aren't they absolutely crucial for any kind of deal?
Well, we have almost absolutely nothing against European countries. So we had good trade relations for all these, not even years, but decades before. And it was European choice not to trade, not to work with Russia. But what about the trust? Okay, so look at the Ukrainian people. So, and I believe based on the polls, about 60 or 70% of Ukrainian people, they don't trust Zelensky. And
okay, well, he won an election, and obviously the elections are paused at the moment because of the invasion from Moscow. But Zelensky was asked about potential future elections, and obviously that the timing has to be right of that, and the conditions have to be right. That's what he indicated. Can I just finish off by saying, do you think there will be either a bilateral or a trilateral meeting coming up ahead?
I believe that would be maybe a few more bilateral meetings between Trump and Putin, but I do not believe that President Putin would agree to meet Zelensky for
Okay. I'm so sorry.
Originally, the presidential more than 1 year ago.
Okay, Dr. Olga Kraniak, I'm so sorry the line dropped out during that answer, but I hope we got most of what you said there. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Thank you. Much more still ahead on the programme. Building bridges between China and India. Beijing's top diplomat says the two nations should be partners, not adversaries. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Jump into 88 Fortune Slots, the free-to-play mobile slots game of the year. Whoa, what an adrenaline rush. Free fall into the iconic 88 Fortune Slots action with billion-coin jackpots and high-roller gameplay. Land mega wins and play the latest game straight from the casino floor. The more you spin, the more you can win. Download 88 Fortune Slots for free and get a 7 billion coin bonus. 88 Fortune Slots. Fortune favors the bold.
Nice car. Still for sale? How about I pay you half now, half later?
There you go, Jake.
Thank you. Did you just sell your car to Carvana?
Yes, I did.
Well, that puts this location into context.
I tried to tell you.
Sell your car to Carvana today.
This is not your typical farm.
This is one of the most incredible things I've ever done. Why are we so suited and booted for this task? I better not touch it anymore.
I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Tech Now on BBC News.
Now, Arab mediators are waiting for Israel to give a formal response to their new proposal for a ceasefire in Gaza. Hamas says it's accepted the conditions contained in the deal. It's part of a last-ditch effort by Qatar and Egypt to secure a ceasefire and hostage release agreement, which could avoid a major new Israeli offensive to fully occupy Gaza. I'm joined by our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet, who's in Cairo. Lise, just tell us more about what's in this proposal and what we know about both sides' reaction to it.
Yes, from what we understand, Geeta, is this is being described as the Witkoff proposal. In other words, the ideas of President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, who's been going back and forth on this crisis and, in fact, on many other crises as well. It's not the full final deal that Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel has talked about recently in saying we don't want a partial deal, we want the end deal. This is an interim deal under which Hamas would agree to release 10 hostages still being held in captivity in Gaza, as well as the remains of 18 others who tragically have died during their captivity. There would be a 60-day ceasefire, and during that time, more humanitarian aid would flow into Gaza, and there would be a discussion of an end to the war. Well, as I mentioned, Prime Minister Netanyahu told his supporters recently, no, none of these temporary deals. Now he has to say, well, OK, fine, we're going to go for this first deal on the way to a final deal. But also, he has made it absolutely clear he doesn't want this war to end until Hamas is completely destroyed. And he set out these 5 principles recently, which don't just talk about Hamas giving up its weapons, demilitarizing the Strip, but also talks about a permanent Israeli security presence. And it's very hard to see Hamas accepting that, very hard for Arab leaders, including those who say they want to be part of the security and the governance of Gaza after Israel leaves and this war ends. So there's still some very, very difficult political issues, but we have to wait and see whether Israel is ready to accept a ceasefire right now.
And Lise, you've been tracking the current level of aid going in and how much and how it is going in. What can you tell us on that?
Israel continues to say that more aid is getting into Gaza. Millions of meals are being distributed in its very contested, it has to say, very controversial new food distribution system called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which UN agencies refuse to work with, saying it violates the principles of independent food distribution. So Israel says the food is getting in, but what we hear time and again, Geeta, and what we saw yesterday when we went to northern Egypt along the Gaza border, is that not enough food is getting in to feed a population of more than 2 million, including a population which is significantly weakened by the months of the blockade when no food at all got in, and where the UN says there are rising cases of deaths of children from hunger. Israel just...
Sorry, we have just lost that line to Lise as well, having a couple of line problems. Sorry about that. But again, fortunately, we got most of what Lise had to say there for us in Egypt. Now, Beijing's top diplomat has said that India and China should regard each other as partners, not rivals. The Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is in Delhi for talks on a disputed border in the Himalayas and is expected to meet with Prime Minister Narendra Modi later. Relations have been thawing since a deadly clash in 2020 between Indian and Chinese troops in the Ladakh region. India's national security advisor also seemed to agree things were getting better. Take a listen.
There has been an upward trend. Borders have been quiet. There have been peace and tranquility. Our bilateral engagements have been more substantial. And we are most grateful to our leaders who, in Kazan, in October last, were able to set a new trend.
Well, let's get more on this. Our correspondent Davina Gupta is in Delhi. Davina, just how significant is this set of meetings and the comments that we're seeing flow from it?
It's extremely crucial, Geeta, given the geopolitical scenario both these countries are dealing with, because both of them have been on the receiving end of Donald Trump's tariff threats. And that's what brought them together. As you mentioned, both nations have seen frosty ties since 2020, when there was a border dispute in which at least 20 Indian soldiers and at least 4 Chinese soldiers were killed in the Galvan Valley region. And from there, we saw that there were tourist bans, direct flights were banned, even Chinese app TikTok was banned in India. And China has been India's second largest trading partner. So when there has been disruption and restrictions of investment, it's hurt not only India but also China. Now, as we see both sides coming together and Wang Yi, a Chinese foreign minister, coming to India, there have been talks in restarting from that point. So ease of restrictions of Chinese investments, resumption of direct flights between the two countries, and also China exporting rare earth metals, which is crucial for India's auto components industry, and also exporting other materials which are crucial for Indian markets. So those have been on the cards, which both sides have been negotiating during these talks. He so far met India's national security advisor. We just heard from him. He's also met India's foreign minister and will be meeting India's prime minister in the next hour or so. What we are expecting from that meeting is an invitation for Prime Minister Modi, which India has now publicly accepted, to attend Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in China. And this is also crucial, Geeta, because it'll be the first time India's Prime Minister will be traveling to China in 7 years. And there are expectations that he could meet China's President Xi Jinping, because even though these photo ops are great, there is a lot of distance when it comes to normalizing ties between these two countries. India also saw border tensions with its neighbor Pakistan and has seen that Chinese-made jets were used by Pakistan during that period in May. And it has seen investment of China in Pakistan. So given these geopolitical tensions in the region, there's a lot to talk about, a lot of work to be done between the two leaders before they can come to a middle point of resumption of normalization of ties.
Davina, briefly, if I can. It was interesting to see India's reaction on China, which happened pretty quickly after Donald Trump imposed very high tariffs, and that there is this threat of secondary sanctions that hangs over India and potentially China, all linking back to the Ukraine-Russia crisis.
Absolutely. And there's a third player here, Geeta, which is Russia, because India has said that it will continue to import Russian crude. Russia is India's biggest oil supplier at the moment, and which means it's given billions of dollars in that trade to Russia, which the US is upset about. It said that it has been used, of course, to fuel war in Ukraine. So India says it has imported this oil for its own energy security. And China is the other biggest importer of Russian oil. So that has brought these two nations together to counteract on the US threats.
Davina Gupta, many thanks indeed. One of Sweden's most iconic wooden churches is being moved in its entirety to prevent damage from mining-related ground shifts. The church in the city of Kiruna, just north of the Arctic Circle, dates back to 1912 and it weighs around 600 tonnes, covering 1,600 square metres. It's to be relocated roughly 5 kilometres from its current site on a giant platform to a new city centre. Well, the old city is at risk from ground fissures after more than a century of iron ore mining. These are the live shots. The whole church being moved right across. The journey is expected to take about 2 days. Maximum speed, we're told, is 500 metres an hour. Very safe. Good luck with that move. We're back in a few moments. Don't go away.
The big stuff. Who do you think you are, Mr. Big Stuff? You're never gonna get my love, Mr. Big Stuff. Tell me, just who do you think you are?
Lease the 2025 Tiguan S for $299 a month. Limited inventory available.
At Fisher Investments, we may look like other money managers, but we're different. You can't be that different.
We are. We have a team of specialists not only in investing, but also in financial and estate planning and more.
Your clients rely on you for all that?
Yes, and as a fiduciary, we always put their interests first.
But you still sell commission-based products, right?
No, we have a simple management fee structured so we do better when our clients do better.
Huh, we're more different than I thought.
At Fisher Investments, we're clearly different.
Every night with this pillow is amazing. So you know that feeling when you wake up feeling like you just left a spa? Well, that has been me every morning since I got this new pillow, the Deep Sleep Pillow. It is the best pillow you will ever sleep on. So if you're on the fence, don't be. Trust me, give the Deep Sleep Pillow a try.
The key question is, where do we begin? Who do you want to go for?
It went up. You can't be proud of that.
Indeed, it did go up.
And you are making the choice not to do that. That's right, isn't it?
Big questions.
Isn't that the definition of political opportunism?
Unmissable moments.
Classic BBC there. Classic. Oh, yeah.
Newsnight.
Thanks, everyone.
With Victoria Derbyshire on BBC News.
Getting my flu shot matters.
Perfect. There you go.
Because there are things I don't want to miss out on.
It matters because we've been planning this trip all year.
We are here.
It matters because she's growing up so quick.
You're so good.
Getting your flu shot matters.
And getting it at CVS matters too.
In your book, the very first words on the first page are, "I am a cellist." Can you remember the first time that you picked up this instrument and the effect that it had on you?
My dad played the cello in his youth, and when I said that I wanted to learn, I took out his cello, which was far too big, of course, and I have a memory of looking down at the instrument at the fingerboard and drawing the bow across the string and feeling the instrument really close to me physically, and enjoying that sensation.
You've been playing violin before that, hadn't you?
I was playing the violin because my mum was teaching me, and my older sister Aista and Bremo, my brother, were playing the violin and the piano, so it was natural to also follow and do what they were doing. I don't have much memory of playing the violin, to be honest, but I don't think I got on very well. And I think at that age, it could have been I just wanted to play a bigger and cooler instrument than my older siblings, or maybe there was something special in the sound that I was really drawn to.
This is BBC News. I'm Geeta Gurumurthy with the headlines. Following yesterday's meeting in Washington, the UK's Prime Minister and the French President host an online meeting with other leaders and discuss the next steps to support Ukraine. The head of the UK Armed Forces visits the US today for talks on the US involvement in security guarantees for Ukraine. A formal response is awaited from Israel after Hamas says it's agreed to the latest Egyptian proposal for a Gaza ceasefire deal. A drug dealer known as the Queen of Ketamine admits supplying the narcotics that killed the Friends actor Matthew Perry. And the UK government has reportedly dropped its demand to access global Apple users' data when needed. Let's bring you more on yesterday's talks. The last few days have been really quite momentous on the Ukraine diplomatic front, and we're also hearing that the French president proposed that possibly Switzerland, Geneva, could be the site for some sort of meeting between Putin and Zelensky. No confirmation of if that meeting's going to go ahead as yet, as to where it might be. But sometimes in moments of intense diplomacy, it is the still photographic images that are the most revealing about what might be going on. Here are the European leaders in the conference before yesterday's meeting with President Trump in the US in the White House. And here are Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron in the room with President Putin. Seated next to Donald Trump is the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, well known for her interesting range of facial expressions, one of which on display here. And of course, it is Volodymyr Zelensky, who's under a lot of pressure. This photo taken from his perspective, showing him with world leaders across the table watching his every move very keenly. And we all remember, of course, what happened last time Zelensky and Trump met at the White House. Smiles there, but it was better yesterday, certainly, than in February, it seemed. Let us speak to Shannon Felton-Spence, politics and communications strategist at Harvard University. Thanks very much for being with us. It was an absolutely extraordinary display yesterday, wasn't it? I know we have said that many times since the Trump presidency, but to actually watch all those European leaders having to sort of almost introduce themselves and say their positions on the talks before they'd even happened in full view of the cameras was really quite something.
Well, extraordinary, I think, is a better word than unprecedented, which I think at this point we have used to death. But yes, absolutely, extraordinary would be the term. The past, 100 hours since Friday have been nothing short of extraordinary. And it has all been quite a political production to show Donald Trump in the center of the political universe, and in this case, in the center of the peacemaking universe, which is exactly where he wants to be. It's exactly where his base wants to see him be. So having a summit on U.S. soil in Alaska, a bilateral with Putin, was extraordinary and showed the rapport between the two men. And we can, read into what we will their body language and what was coming out of that meeting. They had a standalone press statement together, which actually Vladimir Putin began. Which in diplomatic protocol is quite unusual. Normally, Donald Trump would have began that because they were in his home country. And then on Monday, yesterday, we had these 7 European leaders come to the White House sort of on emergency basis to stand as a united front with Donald Trump and try to influence him in that way. And so you see how this sort of reality show is playing out, so to speak, that everyone is sort of coming to Donald Trump to sort of kiss the ring, do the diplomatic bits and bobs, and influence this peace deal in a way that makes sense for them.
And this is not normally how diplomacy with such high stakes to try to resolve a war in which thousands of people are being killed is done, is it? And we did see, a short microphone burst with Trump apparently saying to Macron that he thinks Putin does want to do a deal with him, but it was really fascinating, I thought, to watch the leaders, for example, watching Zelensky, everyone looking really quite strained at what Zelensky was going to say, and then kind of going around the room listening to Merz, the German leader, talk about wanting a ceasefire and whether this was really the right forum for anyone to be pushing those lines rather than behind closed doors.
No, Geeta, you're absolutely right. But what we have to remember with Donald Trump over and over and over again is that the playbook, the normal playbook, whether it is formal or not, is tossed out the window. And he does things on his own terms. And so this was just another example of that. But yes, I think that the European leaders had such high stakes on yesterday. They have each done a phenomenal job of sort of making Donald Trump the center of their diplomatic efforts and really reading the room with him and how to influence him and how to win favor with him. Keir Starmer has done it. Macron has done it. The whole collective has really done their part individually on that.
Is it humiliating for all those leaders for them to be apparently, some would say very obsequious, others would say very polite, others might say, well, it's just politics. This is what you have to do if you want to stay in, the line of sight of the US leader and if you want to be able to influence him?
I think that it is probably slightly humiliating, but also this is the job, right? That's always going to be the job when you're dealing with somebody that you may not see eye to eye on. But the reason that yesterday was so important was because all of that work that they have done for the past 6 months to win that favor with him came down to yesterday, because his favor blows with the wind. So it really was as high stakes as it seemed in those photos.
And in terms of the reception in the US across the political spectrum, obviously there's a huge push to try to get this crisis resolved. what is your sense there at the moment as to whether the US can, will, should commit, for example, to security guarantees? Because there is presumably not very much appetite for US military engagement at all.
It's going to be very hard for him to sell to his base any security guarantee that includes US boots on the ground. So that's step one. I know that he didn't walk away from that possibility yesterday, but it's going to be very hard to sell. And already you're starting to see the very conservative MAGA podcast world start to sort of rebel against that and say, like, this is not what we signed up for, and that's a line that he cannot cross.
Just
so
briefly, Shannon, if Trump did pull this off, if there was some sort of deal acceptable to all sides, it would be a phenomenal achievement that he would have to be recognised for, even by his fiercest critics.
No, absolutely. Donald Trump already has a story to sell, not only to the base, but to the American people. He got NATO to come up to 5%. He got a deal with the EU on trade. He, really his narrative of I can get things done and I can get our allies to do things that they haven't done for 80 years. Actually, he has been able to sell that storyline here.
Shannon Felton-Spence, very good to speak to you as always. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, of course, we've been hearing Donald Trump did confirm that America would be involved in providing some sort of security guarantees for Ukraine in the event of a deal. How could such guarantees work? What would any deal mean for Ukraine's territorial integrity? Russia has been trying to conquer the eastern regions known as the Donbass for more than a decade. It consists of 2 administrative areas, but Ukraine still holds around 30% of Donetsk. Within that, there is a line of cities from Sovyansk, Kramatorsk down to Kostyantynivka in what's been known as Ukraine's fortress belt. Giving it up would leave other parts of Ukraine vulnerable to Russian attack. Well, I'm joined now by Arseniy Yatsenyuk, former Prime Minister of Ukraine. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. It's been a very dramatic few days. Where do you think Ukraine is now left, and do you have trust that meaningful security guarantees can be achieved?
The thing that I would be happy to discuss any kind of security guarantees, but it's all about sequence. The main goal right now is to get the real ceasefire and the peace deal, or just to get a comprehensive peace deal, which includes actually the ceasefire. So we have a quite notorious, I would say, memory of different kind of security assurances since 1994 Budapest Memorandum. But I want to focus right now on whether we can get real peace. I believe what happened in the White House is an amazing stuff, and the optics was perfect, much better than the previous encounter between President Zelensky and President Trump a few months ago. It was a kind of debacle. Now it's a real concerted actions. And the European leaders have shown an unprecedented unity together with the US president and Ukrainian president in trying to hammer out and to devise a joint position against Russia. But the thing is, where Russia stands right now. My gut feeling is Putin is trying to drag his feet again, because after the telephone chat between President Trump and designated war criminal Putin, Russia's side was very clear, saying that we are elaborating over the possibility how to raise the level of negotiators. So they are definitely trying to drag us into another never-ending talks. And the thing is that President Trump has already invested heavily, very heavily, in his meeting with suspected war criminal Putin. And he expected that Putin is to make real concessions. And it's right now to Putin and actually to China to decide whether they are ready to make these concessions. So answering your question, I hope that we are going to get real security guarantees. But the key precondition for any kind of security guarantees is whether we can get durable, fair, and just peace and real peace agreement.
Okay, but if there is no ceasefire initially, which Donald Trump has indicated might not be possible because he wants potentially just a full deal in one go, as it were, what sort of security guarantees do you think Zelensky should be pushing for, and how much land should be exchanged in return? Is Donetsk territory that Ukraine should give up?
You've heard this weird definition of land swap. It is not a land swap. It is a land grab. So let's be very clear about this. And what Putin wants to get, he wants to get an entire Ukraine, not just Donetsk, Lugansk, and the rest of Ukrainian regions. So he wants to take over an entire Ukraine.
Okay,
and
but what I'm trying to understand is just... And I'm just trying to understand, though, in terms of negotiating a peace deal, which there seems to be some momentum for, what is your view as to what security guarantees Ukraine should now be pushing for? Because that is what's being, argued for in detail. And what, is Donetsk territory that you would be happy to be conceded?
The best security guarantee is Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. I mean, full-fledged membership in NATO. But for the time being, we believe that the best security guarantee, as we are still waiting to get the NATO membership, would be an ironclad ratified by the House and by the national parliaments of every European country, strong security agreements between Ukraine and the United States and the EU member states. In terms of this so-called land grab, I want to be very clear. Putin wants to grab Donetsk in order to create another springboard to invade Ukraine further. So I don't believe that Putin is ready just to get Donetsk. So that's a trap. And Ukraine is not selling its territories.
If a deal does involve surrendering that territory in exchange for security guarantees that Zelensky is happy with, is that ultimately a good outcome and it stops the ongoing loss of life?
Well, I am not ready to elaborate on ifs. I want to get a clear-cut position of designated war criminal Putin. Whether is he ready to sign a real peace deal and what kind of conditions he is ready to accept and what kind of concessions he is ready to give. Because right now we are talking just only about Ukrainian concessions. Ukraine would be eager to get peace. And we do understand that we have a lot of difficulties, let me put it this way, on the ground. But let's once again reiterate. So the more we talk about the land grab, the less Putin is ready to cut any real just peace deal.
Okay, we will have to leave it there. Arseniy Yatsenyuk, former Prime Minister of Ukraine, very grateful to you for your time today. Many thanks. Now, let us get more on this. Paul Adams is our diplomatic correspondent. Paul, what can you tell us about where you think the wider political reaction is on all this, given this incredibly dramatic few days of talks that we've had?
Well, it is really hard to know because, as we have seen repeatedly with Donald Trump, he does have a tendency to echo the sentiments of the last person he was speaking to. And so, we had a kind of roller coaster of impressions from just before Alaska to just after Alaska, and then in the wake of yesterday's extraordinary events in Washington. What we have, I suppose we can say this with some confidence, is now a process whereby Ukraine and its European allies, who are there in numbers, feel that they have engaged the attention of Donald Trump, that they have secured a commitment, albeit a very vague one, from Donald Trump to participate in some way in securing Ukraine's future. And that a meeting involving Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, something Mr. Putin has resisted for years, may now be on the cards. But that is all we have at the moment. There is just a mountain of detail that needs to be filled in here. And that's why we're seeing the Europeans kind of trying to capitalize on this sense of momentum. You've got the head of the British military going to Washington to join officials there for talks about security guarantees, trying to see where is the common ground or what can be fleshed out that makes the coalition of the willing, something that Britain and France have been leading a discussion on in Europe since about March. What does it mean now for that? How does Donald Trump's involvement increase the chances of some kind of meaningful presence on the ground? Russia has yet to indicate that it has changed its position on anything. We heard yesterday from the foreign ministry in Moscow an absolute rejection of the idea of any NATO members, not just NATO, but NATO members having a presence on the ground in Ukraine. So we're not any closer to any of that becoming a reality. But there is a process now, and the Europeans are very keen to exploit it while they have Donald Trump's attention.
And Paul, people talk about the Budapest Memorandum and the precision of the language and the precision of what any security guarantees or assurances would look like. Can you briefly explain why that is so important for Ukraine?
Well, look, you heard that in the kind of frustration from Arseniy Yatsenyuk just now. Ever since independence, frankly, Ukraine has been worried about whether or not its neighbor to the east will recognize its borders, will recognize its sovereignty, will try to interfere in Ukraine's domestic politics. And everything from the Budapest Memorandum back at the beginning of the 90s, where Russia was one of several signatories guaranteeing all of that, through the Minsk agreements that followed the initiation of the conflict in the Donbass in 2014 and 2015, through to today, the Ukrainians argue Russia has never, under Vladimir Putin anyway, has never been committed to our security. That they fear that Vladimir Putin simply wants to pocket another bit of territory that might be gifted to him as the result of a diplomatic process, and that would then become a launch pad for some kind of future incursion designed to grab more Ukrainian territory. They have a bitter history, a bitter set of memories about Vladimir Putin's intentions. And that is why, you heard it then, they want everybody to offer cast iron guarantees, and not just pieces of paper, but also practical steps, whether it's policing Ukraine's skies, whether it's commitments to make sure that Ukraine is properly armed for the long term. All of these things have to be in place before there is any willingness to concede any more than they have already been forced to concede.
Paul Adams, many thanks indeed. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Along the skyline of Dubai, beyond the clouds, reaching high, taking the legacy around the world. An ambition so bold. Burj Azizi, a universe in itself. Branded labels to shop from. A 7-star hotel to revel in. Penthouses to live the best life. A mesmerizing observation deck. World-class restaurants. Cinema, nightclub, spa, and more to entertain yourself. This is the world's second tallest tower, a place where the present meets the future. Burj Azizi, amazing on every level.
Now, Arab mediators are waiting for Israel to give a formal response to their new proposals for a ceasefire in Gaza. Hamas says it's accepted the conditions contained in the deal. These are the images showing a plume of smoke rising over Gaza City after the area was targeted by Israeli airstrikes. The proposal, part of a last-ditch effort by Qatar and Egypt to secure a ceasefire and hostage release agreement, which could avoid a major new Israeli offensive to fully occupy Gaza. Well, earlier we heard from the Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesperson on this ceasefire proposal. Here's what he said.
The important thing here is that if we get to a deal, it shouldn't be expected that it would be instantaneously implemented, that it would need some time to reach implementation, like what happened with previous ceasefires. So we're not there yet. Of course, we're still waiting for the Israeli response. And I would stress that the fact that we have a positive response from Hamas is something that has happened before. And then the deal did not materialize. So we're still not at that point where we're ready to talk about the details of how it's going to be implemented.
Well, I'm joined now by Hussein Haridi, former director of the Israeli Affairs Department at Egypt's Foreign Ministry from 2002 to 2004. He's also the former Egyptian ambassador to Spain. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. What do you think the likelihood of success is on this latest proposal?
Well, I would give it 50-50 chance that it would fly. We are waiting for the excuse me. We are waiting for the official Israeli reply and whether Israel, the Israeli ruling coalition, would accept a partial deal as accepted by Hamas yesterday. So it's too early to predict how things would develop in the weeks to come. But hopefully something positive would come out of the Hamas acceptance of this proposal yesterday. We believe here in Cairo, we believe that the American administration have a big role to play to push the Israelis to go along with the proposal that was advanced by both Egypt and Qatar.
And why, in your view, did Hamas agree to it?
Well, I guess during the last few days, Hamas was under tremendous pressure, not only from the mediators, but most importantly, from other Palestinian factions that gathered in Cairo, and they met with the senior Egyptian officials, as well as, of course, we were also coordinating our contacts with them, with the Qataris, and they were pushed into a corner. And they realized that the more time they waste on accepting the release of the hostages, the less weight and the less influence they would have on the course of events in Gaza. On the other hand, of course, the threat or what the Israelis are planning to carry out in Gaza, and they have already started carrying out of major military operations, at the end of which they would reoccupy the city of Gaza. I guess that played a great role in changing the position of Hamas. Personally speaking, I wish they would have accepted this proposal 1.5 months ago, because during the last 6 weeks, some things have changed not only in Israel, but in Gaza itself and among the Palestinians. So now let's see how the Israelis would react to the latest development.
It does not allow this deal for the release of all the hostages, which is presumably going to be very difficult for Israel to accept, given especially what you've just said, if you think Israel is making progress in pushing Hamas.
Well, I completely agree with you. You may recall, Madam, that both the American administration and the Israeli government, after the failure of the last round of negotiations last July, they made it clear that they would only deal with an agreement whereby all the hostages would be released. And in fact, this is a major hurdle now, that the proposal that Hamas accepted is a partial deal. And we understand that the Israeli position is a rejection of any partial deals in order to go along with these ideas of a partial ceasefire and then redeployment of Israeli forces in Gaza Strip.
What do the Palestinians need to do now to strengthen their position, in your view? And what is the concern of Egypt here?
Well, in fact, one of the major objectives of the contacts that Egyptian officials have had with the Palestinian factions, including Hamas, in the last few days was precisely this point, Madam, that the Palestinians should start addressing the world with only one voice. This division between Hamas on the one hand and the Palestinian Authority and some other Palestinian faction on the other hand is no longer tenable.
Okay.
So Egypt is pushing the Palestinians to speak with one voice.
Hussein Haredi, we've got the point. I'm so sorry we're out of time. I asked you a long question, but very grateful to you for your time. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for speaking to us. You're watching BBC News. We're back very soon. Thanks for watching.
Jump into 88 Fortune Slots, the free-to-play mobile slots game of the year. Whoa! What an adrenaline rush! Free fall into the iconic 88 Fortune Slots action with billion coin jackpots and high roller gameplay. Land mega wins and play the latest game straight from the casino floor. The more you spin, the more you can win. Download 88 Fortune Slots for free and get a 7 billion coin bonus. 88 Fortune Slots. Fortune favors the bold.
So, what brings you in?
Ever since I started shopping for cars on Carvana, I can't stop doing this.
Seems like a case of scoliosis.
Is there a cure?
Have you tried picking a car yet?
Thanks, Doc.
Buy your car on Carvana today.
Dad is a legend. Who can we thank for that? Let Ancestry help you piece together your story with a family history membership and detailed DNA results. Start today at Ancestry.
Eric is quite unusual in your work, although it's there in Shame as well, in that it's focusing on a male protagonist. But, I mean, it's something I've referred to a bit earlier. So much of your work is about the female protagonist, isn't it? And it has to. You have to identify with the character at the centre of your work. But is it a different mindset that you have to occupy when you sit down and you're creating that kind of Benedict Cumberbatch character?
No. Absolutely not. I don't think of it any. I don't think of it. I write. I feel very tender about. I mean, I love men. You know, the greatest love of my life is a man. You know, so I love writing about men. But I think we're not that different. I think it's the world that we're in that makes us feel different. You know, it's how we're perceived by the world that makes us different. Yes, of course we are, but I believe we have male and female parts of ourselves anyway. You know, I think in some ways, I'm more male than female sometimes.
I think the first signs that I wanted to be a journalist were, as a kid, I started making pretend reports. I always liked asking a lot of questions. I've had a lot of different jobs in journalism. What I've learned is that it's always about the people. The wildfires was a story I was living through myself. It is really hard to comprehend how life is ever going to get back to normal. Going to bed at night, not really knowing what I was going to wake up to. Fires were burning right around us, so we were having to take split-second decisions about how to gather pictures and tell this story. I knew thousands of people were leaving their homes and were probably never going to get to go back to them. And in the middle of that chaos, I had to find ways to talk to people about what they were experiencing.
That was my house.
It's all gone. I think hearing one person's story helps viewers trust what they're hearing. Because when you can empathise, it helps you get an understanding of the bigger picture.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Following yesterday's meeting in Washington, the UK's Prime Minister and the French President host an online meeting with other leaders to discuss next steps to support Ukraine. The head of the UK Armed Forces visits the US today for talks on the US involvement in security guarantees for Ukraine.
It is not a land swap. It is a land grab. So let's be very clear about this. And what Putin wants to get, he wants to get an entire Ukraine.
Coming up in the programme, a formal response is awaited from Israel after Hamas says it's agreed to the latest Egyptian proposal for a Gaza ceasefire deal. Beijing's top diplomat says China and India should regard each other as partners, not rivals, as the two countries hold talks on a disputed border in the Himalayas. And we find out why one of Sweden's most iconic wooden churches is making a 5-kilometre journey across the Arctic. Hello, I'm Geeta Gurumurthy. Welcome to BBC News Now. The British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, along with French President Emmanuel Macron, has chaired a virtual meeting of the Coalition of the Willing to brief leaders on the outcomes of yesterday's talks in Washington between Presidents Trump, Zelensky and other European leaders, and to discuss the next steps in supporting Ukraine. Well, these are the pictures from the start of the meeting, with President Macron preparing to address other leaders. The Coalition of the Willing is a group of nations that have pledged to help safeguard peace in Ukraine if it is achieved. We're still waiting for the full readout from the meeting, but one of the attendees, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, tweeted that all participants reaffirm the need for continued support for Ukraine. While the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, says that he's already working on concrete security guarantees for Ukraine. In a social media post, he described the talks in Washington as a truly significant step towards ending the war and securing long-term safety for Ukraine. Meanwhile, President Trump says he's spoken with Vladimir Putin about the next steps in his efforts to end the war in Ukraine and is hoping to arrange a meeting between the Russian and Ukrainian presidents. The Kremlin's also confirmed there was a 40-minute phone call between Trump and Putin, during which both leaders discussed the possibility of continuing direct talks between Russia and Ukraine. Well, our North America correspondent Runade Mukherjee has more.
Together and navigating a complex path to peace in what was a day of extraordinary diplomacy at the White House. All smiles amidst an air of positivity. A marked change from President Zelensky's last visit 6 months ago, which ended in a heated exchange.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. If I can, first of all, thank you for invitation and thank you very much for your efforts, personal efforts to stop killings and stop this war. Thank you.
Loads of thanks and some light humor over the Ukrainian leader's suit this time, given how he had chosen that over the usual fatigues after being criticized last time.
President Zelensky, you look fabulous in that suit.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, you look good.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, looks good on
I
you.
said the one that attacked you last time. See, now he's I remember that.
Yeah, I apologize to you. You look wonderful.
As the European leaders joined in, President Zelensky hailed the talks to be the best conversation yet with Donald Trump. Europe and the UK will be key to any NATO-style agreement that they would all rally to defend Ukraine in the future. Conversations largely centered on what security guarantees Ukraine would be given and the level of US's involvement.
There's going to be a lot of help. It's going to be good. They are first line of defense because they're there. They're Europe. But we're going to help them out also. We'll be involved.
But later on, in a post on Truth Social, Mr. Trump's offer for help was explained as, quote, coordination from the US, making the exact same nature of help from the US still unclear.
What shall we do when the war is over? Protection after the end of the war. It is very important that the United States of America sending the signal that they will be among those countries who will help and who will coordinate, and that they'll be participating in the security guarantees for Ukraine, which is a huge step forward.
President Trump says he is now working to arrange a bilateral meeting between the two countries at war and then a possible trilateral meeting, after that with him present. Speaking to the BBC after the talks, UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer said he was pleased with the outcomes of yesterday's meetings.
So a real breakthrough on security guarantees. This is something that's been needed for a long time, very important for security back in the United Kingdom as well as across wider Europe. And then secondly, moving on with the bilateral meeting and then trilateral meeting between the presidents, and the second one including President Trump. That is in order to try to get to an outcome, a peace that is lasting and that is just.
As President Trump tries to project himself as the leader who is trying to get peace deals done around the world, that remained the crux of the conversations all through yesterday, with European leaders complimenting his efforts in trying to resolve the conflict. In the absence of a ceasefire, leaders know they are racing against the clock to get a peace deal done. Until that happens, the military onslaught on the ground is expected to continue. Arunodaya Mukherjee, BBC News, Washington.
Well, a virtual meeting of the so-called Coalition of the Willing has been held earlier today, and I spoke to our political correspondent Joe Pike on what moves might come next.
We are expecting what Number 10 called a readout, a summary of that Coalition of the Willing meeting today. We should have that in the next, I don't know, half hour or so, perhaps. Sometimes those summaries are bland, but certainly from that footage from the Elysee, Keir Starmer starting to speak at the start of that meeting. He seemed to thank other leaders for convening at short notice, but also say he wanted to explain, download, recap what happened in Washington yesterday, because of course the group of leaders in the White House was far smaller than this very significant group, the Coalition of the Willing, largely European and Commonwealth leaders. We don't know, of course, what the various countries involved in that coalition have committed to as in terms of security guarantees in the event there being a Ukraine peace deal. I suppose that's partly because they don't want to provide any negotiating advantage to Russia, but also I'm sure in different countries there may be domestic political considerations too. Certainly the UK has described what happened yesterday in the White House as a breakthrough. Keir Starmer saying that commitment to US involvement in security guarantees is significant. And as you say, the chief of the UK Defence Staff, the top officer in the UK military, Sir Tony Radakin, is currently on his way to Washington, Geeta, to discuss exactly what the US will provide. Clearly the hope in Westminster, in London, is that there'll be more details in the coming days as to the US's role, and all of this bolsters Volodymyr Zelensky's position in negotiations with Russia, if they do happen in the coming weeks.
And Joe, it was absolutely fascinating, wasn't it, to watch all the interactions between those leaders, something that we don't necessarily get to see very often. And interesting to see Jonathan Powell, the British National Security Advisor, in the room too for some of those meetings. Now, he has a lot of previous experience, very crucially involved in the Northern Ireland peace process, then worked in conflict resolution privately for many years. Does that tell us anything about, for example, the British government and this Coalition of the Willing group in terms of how they might be thinking now about very detailed planning for any land exchange or for what a security guarantee could look like? Because there's a lot of detail that needs to be worked through.
There certainly is, and the view of Number 10 on land, on territory, is it really should be a matter for the Ukrainian people. Certainly UK government sources seem pretty pleased that Donald Trump didn't put pressure on Volodymyr Zelensky, at least in front of the cameras, to explain what land could possibly be ceded. UK government sources don't want to go anywhere near that, and they say that's a matter for Volodymyr Zelensky, and Ukraine may move slowly. On the point of Jonathan Powell, he was seen in the back of shot on a seat behind all those leaders. Interesting that two Tony Blair era figures in Jonathan Powell, the UK National Security Advisor, and Peter Mandelson, who is the UK's ambassador to the US, are heavily involved in this. I've spoken to people close to Keir Starmer in recent weeks who say part of the power of Jonathan Powell, even though he's never seen really in front of the camera and doesn't do interviews, is that because of his work in Northern Ireland and in that peace process, he does get a hearing in various European capitals, including in Kyiv. And this person said to me, if Jonathan Powell comes to you with a paper or a proposal, you're going to at least listen to it. So I think he is at the heart of these negotiations, and also, Geeta, I think at the heart of this new Coalition of the Willing.
Joe Pike there in Westminster speaking to me a little bit earlier. Well, before European leaders sat down with President Trump in the East Room at the White House yesterday, a microphone did pick up some remarks between the US leader and the French President Emmanuel Macron. President Trump appeared to be reassuring his French counterpart that Vladimir Putin was open to making a deal.
I think he wants to make a deal for me. You understand that, as crazy as it sounds? Just sit down. Sit down, everybody.
Okay.
I think we'll let the press come in for a minute.
Brief comment there that was just picked up accidentally, we think, on the microphones. Well, Dr. Olga Krasiniak is an associate professor at the National Research University Higher School of Economics in Moscow. And I asked her about that clip and a view from Russia, from her point of view.
I believe that Russia, together with the United States, they opt for peace, but it should be a conditional peace, of course. So with addressing all these initial problems or issues which led to this conflict. And on the other hand, we have European leaders and Zelensky, Ukrainian president, who continue to opt for the war because they want to continue to contain Russia. So, and we see this colliding narratives and colliding attitudes. But two great powers, the United States and Russia, I believe they have this decisive approach, and those countries and those leaders who will decide.
In terms of what the next steps are, do you think the Kremlin now is going to accept any kind of ceasefire, or will it want to move directly to some sort of final peace move? And is it going to accept security guarantees which are not delivered by NATO but on NATO style?
Well, Russia is open for peace talks, and it was explicitly announced from the beginning of the war in early 2022. And what Russia wants, what Russia's conditions, it's also known, and it wasn't changed. So Russia's foreign policy behavior and Russia's attitude in Ukraine are known, and they were not changed. So, but the next step, so I believe that would be the continuation of the discussions and like a real, just bringing real steps with the United States, because it would not be that Russia would agree or would accept something. It would be the United States would maybe push Ukraine or European countries to accept Russia's attitude and Russia's condition. So, and
what do you mean exactly by that? Because we've heard discussion in the last few days of potentially some exchange or giving up of land potentially by Ukraine. Nothing agreed, of course, as yet. But that could only even be contemplated if there are really robust security guarantees, because Ukraine needs to know and Europe needs to know that this cannot happen again, that any further encroachment on Ukrainian territory cannot happen again.
You know, the only one guarantee can be given by Russia to Ukraine is having good relations between Russia and Ukraine. It would be the only way, the only thing that would keep Ukraine in safe position. Because, you know, here's the proverb, choose your neighbor. And probably that Ukrainian choice for different countries, like distant countries, maybe it's not a smart choice. You know, I cannot even imagine that, let's say, Scotland or North Ireland would ask for guarantee China or anyone else. So, and same can be applied to Ukraine. So having good relations with Russia, having our common historical and cultural heritage, so that will be the only way would keep Ukraine in safe place.
Dr. Olga Krasiniak, an academic there, researcher in Moscow, giving me her view a little bit earlier. Well, I'm joined now by our correspondent Katie Watson, who is in Kiev for us. Katie, the morning after the night before, as it were, where do you think now reaction is in Kiev? How much optimism is there?
Well, we've heard President Zelensky say this is a significant step to ending the war. I'd say here in Kyiv, it's a cautious optimism. And I think cautious optimism is a word that's been used quite a lot in the last few days or hours, perhaps. I think people here are pleased about this talk about security guarantees. It feels that EU leaders, US, it's gaining momentum, this need for robust security guarantees for Ukraine. So people here are pleased about that. I spoke to one woman earlier who felt that the optics of seeing President Zelensky with Donald Trump and EU leaders will show President Putin that Ukraine has allies and perhaps put him in a weaker position. But, you know, this is against a backdrop of a war that's still very much ongoing. 270 drones were launched by Russia overnight, as well as missiles, 16 different areas in in Ukraine were hit, and it's a daily reality, I think, for people here in Ukraine. So the war is very much ongoing. President Zelensky has asked for a ceasefire before any peace talks are to go ahead, and people here feel that there's hope. As one man said to me, hope is a really important emotion these days. So yeah, I think hopeful, cautious optimism, but still it's a very long way away from peace.
And is there any consensus on whether, for example, giving up the territory in Donetsk would be a price that is worth paying if there are security guarantees that Zelensky feels he can trust along with his European allies?
I think it's a pretty resounding no from here in Ukraine. I haven't spoken to anybody who feels that could be an option. People don't see it as a concession because it's land that Russia occupies, has taken, and that's giving Russia land that they shouldn't have taken in the first place. So for many Ukrainians, that's just seen as an absolute red line. President Zelensky has made it clear that that's not an option. That said, people are war weary. They don't want this to go on. Whether perhaps, if there's a ceasefire and then peace negotiations can start, there may be a bit more kind of ability to discuss these things. But right now, certainly nobody here I've spoken to feels that that's even an option.
And in terms of the detail of security guarantees, has Kyiv outlined even privately what it wants?
President Zelensky said in the meetings in Washington it's about making sure that the military is in a fit state. So whether that's boots on the ground, whether that's logistics, intelligence, I think that detail needs to be worked out. But certainly the noise coming from European leaders and Donald Trump yesterday, there was that feeling of cohesion that there needs to be more support to be able to deter any future attacks from Russia.
Just finally, Katie, briefly, relief that this meeting in the White House was less difficult than last time.
Yeah, and I think there's a sigh of relief, certainly from here. I spoke to one woman who was really worried about that meeting, worried that President Zelensky would be made a fool of. But, I mean, you could see there were niceties, there was this impression of diplomacy, of getting along, because there's too much to lose if that doesn't happen. So it was a very, very different dynamic to what we saw in February.
Katie Watson in Kyiv, many thanks. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
What's up, Carl Nation? It's your #1 broker with the best full-service wealth management skills in the biz.
Actually, I'm seeing something from Schwab.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, Schwab lets you invest and trade on your own.
And if you want, they can even manage it for you.
Not to mention, Schwab has a team of specialists for taxes, insurance, and estate planning, all with low fees.
We're experiencing technical difficulties.
Carl.
Schwab, a modern approach to wealth management.
We just want to have enough money for retirement.
And travel to visit our grandchildren.
I understand. That's why at Fisher Investments, we start by getting to know each other so I can learn about your family, lifestyle, goals and needs, allowing us to tailor your portfolio.
What about commission-based products?
We don't sell those. We're a fiduciary obligated to act in your best interests.
So how do your management fees work?
We have a transparent fee structured so we do better when you do better. At Fisher Investments, we're clearly different.
Now, Arab mediators are waiting for Israel to give a formal response to their new proposals for a ceasefire in Gaza. Hamas says it's accepted the conditions contained in the deal. It's part of a last-ditch effort by Qatar and Egypt to secure a ceasefire and hostage release agreement, which could avoid a major new Israeli offensive to fully occupy Gaza. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, is in Cairo.
Yes, from what we understand, Geeta, is this is being described as the Witkoff proposal. In other words, the ideas of President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, who's been going back and forth on this crisis and, in fact, on many other crises as well. It's not the full final deal that Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel has talked about recently in saying we don't want a partial deal, we want the end deal. This is an interim deal under which Hamas would agree to release 10 hostages still being held in captivity in Gaza, as well as the remains of 18 others who tragically have died during their captivity. There would be a 60-day ceasefire, and during that time, more humanitarian aid would flow into Gaza, and there would be a discussion of an end to the war. Well, as I mentioned, Prime Minister Netanyahu told his supporters recently,
Had she been assaulted on a British Airways flight to the UK in the same circumstances, on a reading of the scheme, she'd be entitled to compensation. Because it happened to be on a Qatar Airways flight, she's not. And that creates what we see as a two-tier justice. It's unfair and it's unreasonable.
The government says the rules that the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority follows and the values of payments for injuries are set by Parliament. Other routes are available for victims to receive support. In 1996, the Civil Aviation Act was changed so that crimes committed on foreign airline flights going to the UK could be prosecuted in the UK criminal courts. Kelly says this alteration needs to be reflected in the compensation scheme.
I just want to be compensated for what I've been through. It's not something that's easy. I want professional help. I want to feel like I've been heard, and that's really all.
Seema Katecha, BBC News.
Now, one of Sweden's most iconic wooden churches is right now in the process of being moved. The church in the city of Kiruna, just north of the Arctic Circle, dates back to 1912. And it weighs around 600 tonnes, covering 1,600 square metres, and it is being relocated roughly 5 kilometres from its current site on a giant rolling platform to a new city centre. The old city is at risk from ground fissures after more than a century of iron ore mining. Well, you can see the live pictures of it. It is moving very slowly, travelling at a maximum speed of 500 metres an hour. I wonder if anyone's actually monitoring its speed. And it is expected to take about 2 days for the whole journey. Those are the live pictures there from Sweden. You are watching BBC News. I'm Geetha Gurumurthy. Thanks for being with us.
When expectations are high, there's no room for uncertainty. To maximize impact, your logo needs to look great, on the right gear, and arrive on time. And that starts with 4imprint. To get your brand noticed, visit 4imprint.com.
4imprint, for certain.
Save up to 50% on select styles of beautiful new carpet, hardwood, vinyl, and laminate from Empire Today. We'll beat any competitor's offer, guaranteed. Visit EmpireToday.com or call
800-588-2300 Empire.
Today. When you're actively trading, the fees really start to add up. Public is the only platform that offers rebates on your option trades, which help offset those costs. It's a simple way to help me keep more of what I earn.
You've got a glow about you, inside and out. Show it to the world with just 10 minutes of self-care. Meet Omnilux Contour, an LED light therapy mask clinically proven to reduce fine lines and wrinkles. Find out how you can improve your skin at OmniluxLED.com.
Dad is a legend. Who can we thank for that? There were generations of dads who passed down their legacies. Discover who they were and how they led to you with an Ancestry Family History membership. See your roots and where those stories came from with an Ancestry DNA kit. Put them together and there you are. Get started today at Ancestry.
All right, locked in for this meeting. Total focus. Double booked? All good. Otter AI gives meeting notes and insights, even on meetings I can't attend. Dang it, I picked the boring one.
Otter, the AI meeting agent.
In your book, the very first words on the first page are, I am a cellist. Can you remember the first time that you picked up this instrument and the effect that it had on you?
My dad played the cello in his youth, and when I said that I wanted to learn, I
I took out his cello, which was far too big, of course, and I have a memory of looking down at the instrument at the fingerboard and drawing the bow across the string and feeling the instrument really close to me physically, and enjoying that sensation.
You've been playing violin before that?
I was playing the violin because my mum was teaching me, and my older sister Aista and Bremo, my brother, were playing the violin and the piano, so it was natural to also follow and do what they were doing. I don't have much memory of playing the violin, to be honest, but I don't think I got on very well. And I think at that age, it could have been I just wanted to play a bigger and cooler instrument than my older siblings, or maybe there was something special in the sound that I was really drawn to.
Keep on track with the world of athletics on the BBC Sport website and app. Get all the news, results and reaction with our expert analysis on the top global events, including the Diamond League and the world's leading marathons. Go online or download the app now.
Now on BBC News, the latest from New York and around the world. Business Today.
Live from New York at the opening bell, this is Business Today. Wall Street opens flat as investors eye retail earnings and the Fed's next move. We'll be looking closer at Home Depot, which missed its targets as Americans cut back on costly home renovations. And President Zelensky gets a warmer White House welcome as the US deepens economic ties with Ukraine's mineral sector. Welcome to Business Today, live from New York. I'm Michelle Fleury, and we start on Wall Street, which is pretty flat at the opening bell as new earnings from major retailers begin to roll in. Sales at American home improvement giant Home Depot rose slightly, a sign perhaps that the housing slump is ending. More on that in a bit. Meanwhile, shares in Intel have jumped after it was announced that SoftBank will invest roughly $2 billion in the company. This as the US government is reportedly considering taking a stake in the chipmaker. And traders are also looking ahead to a key speech from Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell later in the week. Well, to go through all of this, I'm joined now by Tali Leger, Chief Market Strategist at the Wealth Consulting Group. Tali, always good to have you on the programme. Let's start with this. With the worst of the tariff tensions seemingly behind us, the Fed signalling potential rate cuts ahead, is this the moment that investors have been waiting for to feel confident again to push the market even higher than it already is?
So, Michelle, that precisely is our view at the Wealth Consulting Group. But what we're seeing through this whole rally off the April lows in stocks is a persistent pessimism. So I'm not seeing the confidence yet on the part of investors broadly, but the silver lining to this story here is that's actually very good for our bullish market view.
With producer and manufacturing prices going up more than expected in July, do you think that makes a bigger rate cut, like, say, 0.5%, less likely at the Federal Reserve September meeting?
I think it could. And again, I remain in the camp that the Fed should be taking the escalator down now as opposed to waiting longer and being forced to take the elevator down because of something more sinister at work in the economy. So again, I think that the housing market you mentioned earlier is under pressure here and could benefit from some additional interest rate cuts right here. And that would add, I think, fuel to this fire that's raging underneath the stock market, taking it to another higher level.
I wanted to ask you about S&P Global. It kept its AA+ credit rating on the United States, saying that tariffs could help offset the cost of Donald Trump's tax cuts. Do the markets see that as credible, or is this really just kicking the fiscal can down the road?
So I think The rating agencies are usually known as the last to move, and some of these downgrades, I think, have been late. I think that generally speaking, the U.S. is still recognized as a good credit around the world. But look, I think there's something to be said for the cyclical improvement that we have seen in the federal deficit. It is, yes, 7% of GDP here, but it was much worse. I think it was closer to 14%, so double what it is now. And I think that at the margin, you could stand to see a bit of additional improvement as we move forward.
Tali Leger, Chief Market Strategist at the Wealth Consulting Group. Always good to chat.
Cheers.
Now, a closer look at Home Depot, which missed sales and profit forecast last quarter as cost-conscious homeowners scaled back major renovations and stuck to smaller DIY projects. The results kick off what is going to be a busy week for US retail earnings, with Walmart and Target still to report. A key test of consumer spending and how retailers are weathering the uncertainty of President Trump's tariff policies. Remember, consumer spending accounts for roughly 2/3 of all US economic activity. Joining me now is Bruce Winder, independent retail analyst. Bruce, let's start with the American homeowner, Home Depot's bread and butter. What kind of shape do you think US homeowners are in right now financially? Are they still spending on home improvement projects or pulling back?
Yeah, they're pulling back on major projects. So they're doing some small do-it-yourselfer projects. But if you look at the major renovations like bathrooms and kitchens, they're putting those off right now because those are often financed. And as we know, interest rates are higher right now in the US, so they're deferring that.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned financing, obviously buying a home in the first place, mortgage rates, they have been stubbornly high. That slowed down the housing market. If interest rates do start to come down, and many think they will, do you think we'll see a wave of pent-up demand for home renovations?
Yeah, I think we could. I think people have put it aside. To your point, no one's really selling and buying their houses right now. That whole market slowed. So I think there is some pent-up demand because people will want to upgrade as they move through their life cycle. So if rates start to come down, I think that'll help Home Depot, Lowe's, and others in the sector.
Home Depot said it wouldn't raise prices in response to tariffs. That's fantastic for consumers, but what about the company's bottom line? Looking through these numbers, have you seen it start to squeeze profit margins or not?
Yeah, I have. I mean, their earnings are off a little bit versus last year, and I think they're going to have to raise prices. Now, Home Depot might not have as much of an import mix as, say, a Walmart or a Target, but definitely a lot of what they sell is bought from Southeast Asia and other countries that are subject to the tariffs. So I think you're going to have to see them raise prices. In addition, they bought a couple of distributors that target the pro market, and those distributors run at lower margins. So I think they're going to have no choice.
Bruce Winder, independent retail analyst. We're going to have to leave it there, but thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Michelle.
Turning to geopolitics, President Zelensky was back in the Oval Office yesterday and greeted far more warmly than in February. But President Trump admits ending Ukraine's war is still a tough one. Minerals may be key. In May, the US struck a deal for a stake in Ukraine's natural resources, many in conflict zones or under Russian control. Any settlement, though, still needs buy-in from both Kyiv and Moscow. We spoke to Holger Schmieding, chief economist at Berenberg Bank, about what's at stake.
This is, of course, an important issue. Rare earths are simply rare. China has a near monopoly on rare earth at the moment. So getting more access to them in Russia, in Ukraine, would be a positive for the world economy. But as you already said, sorting this out is going to be very, very difficult, as a significant part of the Ukrainian reserves are in disputed territory. And this would all require the conflict to be settled. And at the moment, what we are hoping for is that there will be a meeting between Putin and Zelensky, but it's not yet clear that there could be any breakthrough, as Russia has not gone back, rescinded its maximalist demands. Well, especially from a US perspective, a Trump perspective, this seems to be a lot about money, about business deals, about the US, for instance, doing deals with Russia in the future. From a European perspective, it's different. From the European perspective, it's clearly about ending the war and making sure that Putin will not be in a position to attack Ukraine or a European NATO member in the future. And these are very difficult issues, and a resolution is not yet, unfortunately, immediately in sight.
Now, tariffs are leaving a bitter taste for some. For decades, coffee imports entered the United States largely duty-free. But now some of America's top trading partners are facing double-digit tariffs on their imports, including coffee. That's true of Brazil, the largest supplier of coffee to the United States. Its exports now face a 50% tariff into the US. It's straining an industry that provides more than 1 million jobs in the US, and it's poised to strain prices too. My colleague, Erin Delmore, has been hearing from importers.
This is a bag of 50 pounds of Brazilian French roast. It would have been $147.50 before the tariff and $359.50 after the tariff.
Peter Longo's Puerto Rico importing company has been a staple on New York City's Bleecker Street since 1907. A bestseller is Café Blend. It's reliant on Brazilian beans. They're now subject to a 50% import tax thanks to President Trump's tariffs.
The amount of the tariff is so large that it's going to really affect the price of the coffee. So for instance, if we're selling coffee for $15.99 and there's a 50% tariff, that coffee is going to go up another $8. That's going to be in the 20s. That's crazy. People won't buy it. $30 a pound, that's ridiculous. That's going to kill the market for Brazilian coffee, which is, I guess, the purpose. They want to punish Brazil for whatever reason, so they're putting a draconian tariff on it.
More production at home will mean stronger competition and lower prices for consumers.
President Trump is remaking the global trade world order through tariffs, charging importers like Peter a fee to bring products in from other countries. The goal is to get foreign countries to lower trade barriers and to make foreign-made products more expensive so that American-made products are more competitive and eventually preferred. That, in turn, would spur more manufacturing and production of goods right here in the USA. But the thing is, coffee isn't really grown in the U.S. Thanks. It can't be. It's a tropical fruit that grows along a narrow strip of land around the equator. It does grow in some parts of Hawaii and Puerto Rico and a tiny slice of Southern California, but that's not nearly enough to power the 450 million cups of coffee Americans drink every day. And so, virtually all of it needs to be imported. And that's why tariffs on coffee-producing countries, and especially those 50% tariffs on Brazil, which supplies around a third of all the coffee consumed in the U.S., is impactful for people who sell and import coffee like Peter.
Horribly stressed. Horribly stressed. It keeps me up at night because you have to try to figure out a way to manage your cash flow to anticipate what's coming.
The stakes were high before tariffs were even announced. Back in February, the global price of Arabica coffee hit its highest point on record. Even though that's come down a bit, roasted coffee cost consumers 15% more last month than it did a year prior. All of that puts pressure on sellers like Peter.
This is how I make my living, so if we have to shrink, we'll shrink. And if we have to shrink to the point where we go out of business, there's nothing I can do about it, and we'll do the best we can.
But he's betting that that morning cup of joe is something people will keep shelling out for, even if it costs them more.
I need 3 double espressos just to be conscious. And I know my customers are very ritualized when it comes to their coffee. They enjoy it. It's something they look forward to. So I don't think coffee is going away.
Not going away, but perhaps going up in price. Now, before we go, just a quick recap. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up at the moment. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq both down. Home Depot helping to lift the earnings and the market there with the Dow. That's all we have time for here on Business Today. Do stay with us here on BBC News. Goodbye.